You know, in the middle of a war, there are rules. There's equipment that's been approved, stamped, and issued. But what happens when that official gear, the stuff you're supposed to trust with your life, just isn't cutting it? What happens when the rules are actually getting people killed? Well, sometimes you have to break those rules. You have to invent, you have to build something that technically shouldn't even exist. Today, we're going to talk about exactly that. A story about an illegal machine gun cobbled together by a couple of Marines that brought an absolutely terrifying amount of firepower to the single bloodiest battlefield of the Pacific War.
So, to really get why this weapon had to be invented, you first have to understand the problem. And this wasn't some small logistical issue. This was a problem being written in the blood of U.S. Marines all across the Pacific. The island-hopping campaign against Japan was just unbelievably brutal. We're talking close quarters, savage fighting. Marines hitting fortified beaches, trying to clear out an enemy that was dug in like you wouldn't believe. And the main tool they were given for this job, their standard-issue machine gun was, well, to be blunt, it was failing them.
All right, let's break down this mismatch because it's pretty stark. Over here on the left, you've got the official weapon, the M1919 Browning. It was a good gun, super reliable. But just look at those specs. It's a 32.5-pound monster that really needs a team of 3 or more guys to lug around and operate. The rate of fire, about 500 rounds per minute, was perfectly fine if you were sitting in a bunker defending a position. But look at the other side. That's what a Marine actually needed when storming a beach. They had to be light, they had to be fast, and most importantly, they needed to throw so much lead downrange that the enemy couldn't even poke their heads up. The M1919 was a defensive weapon being jammed into an offensive role, and that gap was getting Marines killed.
And I really want to stress this point. The M1919 was not a bad gun, not at all. Bolt it to a Jeep or put it in a fixed position, and it was fantastic. The problem was all about context. In the thick jungles and on the soft volcanic sands of these islands, being able to move fast meant you lived, and being able to unleash overwhelming firepower meant you won. The M1919 just couldn't deliver on either of those things when it mattered most. You had Marines pinned down, watching their buddies get hit, while the machine gun team was struggling just to drag this heavy weapon into a good firing position. Every second counted, and they were losing them. They desperately needed something better.
And that something better, well, it wasn't going to roll off a factory line in Detroit. It wasn't going to come from some high-level committee at the Pentagon. No, this solution was going to come from the ground up, from the troops themselves. And specifically, it came out of this really unique elite unit in the Marine Corps that basically encouraged this kind of outside-the-box thinking, the Paramarines.
So, who were the Paramarines? Well, they were an experiment. These were the guys trained to be dropped from planes behind enemy lines, to operate on their own and just cause chaos. And that kind of mission, it attracts a certain type of person. Not just a tough guy, but a thinker, an innovator, someone who sees a problem and immediately starts figuring out how to solve it. See, in a regular unit, if a sergeant started cutting up government-issued weapons, he'd probably be looking at a court-martial. But in the Paramarines, that same kind of initiative, that might just earn you a pat on the back. It was this culture that created the perfect environment for an idea like the Stinger to even be possible.
And this brings us to the man himself, our inventor, Sergeant Milan Gravich. Now, Gravich wasn't just another tough Marine. Critically, before the war, he was a machinist. He understood how metal works, he knew how to build things. He had the skills to see a problem not as a roadblock, but as an engineering puzzle waiting to be solved. And as he was looking at all these wrecked American planes scattered across the Pacific Islands, basically airplane graveyards, he saw something nobody else did. He saw a solution hiding in plain sight.
Okay, now, these numbers right here tell you everything you need to know. The weapon Gravich salvaged was the AN/M2 aircraft machine gun. Just look at the difference. It's more than 10 pounds lighter than the standard M1919. But the number that should make your jaw hit the floor is the rate of fire. Up to 1,500 rounds per minute. That is nearly 3 times faster. The reason it could do this is that it was designed to be cooled by the insane wind produced by a flying airplane. But that was also its biggest problem on the ground. Without that constant airflow, it would overheat so fast it would basically destroy itself.
So there's the challenge, right? How do you take this unbelievable airborne firepower and make it work for a guy running on a beach? Gravich wasn't trying to invent a whole new weapon. He was creating a hybrid, a sort of Frankenstein's monster of a gun, by taking the best parts from different weapons and stitching them together into something new. This is basically the recipe for this amazing battlefield creation. At its heart, you have that super fast A&M/4 AFIAA aircraft gun. Then, for the stock, so a soldier could actually hold and aim it, Gravich and his partner, Private John Little,
took one from a standard M1 Garand rifle and modified it. For stability and aiming, they took the bipod and rear sight from a Browning automatic rifle, the BAR, parts that every Marine already knew how to use. And the final touch, the real piece of genius, was a custom trigger they had to make from scratch out of sheet metal because the plane's electrical firing system was obviously useless to an infantryman.
And the final product was just a masterpiece of field innovation. It weighed only 25 pounds, light enough for one man to carry into an assault, and it could spit out bullets at that horrifying rate of 1,200 to 1,500 rounds a minute. They had done it. They had created a weapon that gave a single Marine the firepower of a whole squad. They called it the Stinger.
But here's what's maybe the most incredible fact in this whole story. This wasn't something they put on an assembly line. This was a handcrafted instrument of war. Sergeant Gravich and his partner, working in makeshift shops with whatever tools they could find, only ever built 6 of them. Just 6. Each one representing hours and hours of pure, painstaking work.
These 6 Stingers were finished just in time. The 5th Marine Division was getting ready to ship out for its next objective, an objective that would become maybe the most famous and certainly one of the most brutal battles in the entire history of the Marine Corps, Iwo Jima. The Stinger was about to be tested in one of the deadliest, most fortified places on the entire planet.
I want you to just look at this number for a second. 6,821. That's how many U.S. Marines and Navy corpsmen were killed on that tiny volcanic island. Nearly 20,000 more were wounded. The Japanese commander had turned the island into a fortress of tunnels and hidden concrete pillboxes. His order to his men wasn't to win. It was to kill so many Americans that the U.S. would lose the will to invade Japan. That's the hell that these 6 Stinger machine guns were about to enter.
And one of those 6 guns ended up in the hands of Corporal Tony Stein. And honestly, if you were to custom design a soldier to use this custom-designed weapon, it would be him. Just like Gravich, Stein had been a toolmaker in his civilian life. He got it. He understood the weapon's mechanics. He knew its incredible strengths, but he also knew its critical weakness, that it could overheat. He knew exactly how to push it right to the edge without breaking it. It was the perfect match of man and machine.
And you don't have to take my word for it. This quote is from his official Medal of Honor citation, the U.S. military's highest award for bravery. It explicitly calls out his use of this personally improvised aircraft-type weapon. Think about that. This might be the only Medal of Honor in history that officially recognizes a soldier for using an unauthorized field-made gun. That's how critical this innovation was. So what did he do with it? On the first day of the invasion, D-Day, what Tony Stein did was just legendary. His platoon gets pinned down by hidden machine guns. So what does he do? He stands up in the open and makes himself a target just so his guys can see where the enemy fire is coming from. Then he charges those positions by himself, the Stinger just roaring, and wipes them out. The gun chewed through ammo, so he kicked off his boots and socks to run faster and made 8 separate trips back to the beach through open terrain to get more ammo. And on every single trip back, he grabbed a wounded Marine and helped carry him to safety. The Stinger was literally shot out of his hands twice, and he just picked it back up and kept going. A few days later, Stein got wounded badly enough that he was taken off the island and put on a hospital ship. This was his ticket out. He was safe. He had done more than his share. But then he heard that his unit was taking terrible casualties. He couldn't stay on that ship. He voluntarily left the safety of the hospital and went back to the front lines. The bond he had with the Marines fighting next to him was just stronger than any instinct to save himself. And this timeline, it just lays out the tragedy of his last few days. On March 1st, 1945, while leading a patrol to find enemy positions, Tony Stein was killed by a Japanese sniper. The man who had faced down machine gun bunkers and ran through a storm of bullets was taken out by a single, well-placed shot. He was only 24 years old. So what happened to this incredible gun? After all that, what is the real legacy of the Stinger? A weapon born from pure ingenuity and proven in the hands of an absolute hero. Well, the answer is a little complicated. The hard truth is, the weapon just disappeared. After the war, the military's all about standardization. It has to be. And there was no place in that system for a homemade, unauthorized gun. The 6 Stingers were almost certainly rounded up and scrapped. They existed outside the official system, and in the end, that same system simply erased them. They were a tool for a specific moment, and when that moment passed, they were gone.
And this chart really puts into perspective how unbelievably ahead of its time the Stinger was. Just look at this. The old M1919 is firing at 500 rounds per minute.
The M60, the famous gun from the Vietnam era that came decades later, fired at around 600. The Stinger, a gun built in a tent in 1945, was firing at over 1,300. It took the military decades to officially field a weapon that could even come close to the kind of mobile firepower that Gravich and Stein had figured out on their own.
So if the gun itself is gone, what's the point? What's the real takeaway here? The legacy of the Stinger isn't the physical object. It's the powerful idea that it stands for. It's about that spirit of individual initiative. It's a story that shows us that the people on the front lines, the ones facing the problem head-on, often know the solution better than anyone. It's about having the ingenuity to see a better way and the courage to build it, especially when lives are on the line.
And that really leaves us with a final question, one that's just as relevant today as it was in 1945. This isn't just a war story. It's about the constant push and pull between rigid systems and human creativity. When the official plan isn't working, when the standard equipment falls short, who steps up to fill that gap? The story of Sergeant Gravich, Corporal Stein, and their 6 Stingers gives us a pretty powerful answer. It's the people on the ground, the ones who see the problem with their own eyes and have the guts to build the answer themselves.